London, 1854. A woman left at the altar refuses to disappear, and the man who humiliated her will pay the price. If you've ever been underestimated, cast aside, or told you weren't enough, stay until the end of this story. You won't believe how Clara Whitmore turned public disgrace into absolute power. And if you're watching from London, Manchester, New York, or anywhere in between, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's begin. The church smelled of lilies and lies. Clara Whitmore stood at the end of the aisle in a gown that had taken 3 months to make, white silk cascading around her like a promise someone else had written. The pews were packed, London's finest, all dressed in their sharpest judgment, waiting for the moment she'd become respectable, become safe, become exactly what they expected. She should have known better. The vicar cleared his throat for the third time, his face going pink around the edges. The organist had stopped playing 5 minutes ago. The silence was thick enough to choke on. "Miss Whitmore?" the vicar said quietly, leaning in like he was delivering news of a death. "Perhaps we should—" "He's coming," Clara said. Her voice didn't shake. It wouldn't. Not here, not in front of them. But even as she said it, she knew. Richard Pemberton wasn't coming. The whisper started in the back pews, a hiss of silk and venom that rolled forward like fog. Clara's mother sat rigid in the front row, her face a mask of porcelain dignity that was cracking at the seams. Her father stared straight ahead, jaw tight enough to shatter teeth. 10 more minutes passed, then 15. The vicar touched her elbow. "My dear, I think—" "Don't." Clara pulled away, her bouquet trembling in her hands. White roses. She'd picked them herself. She'd been so stupidly, blindly sure. Someone laughed. Just one person, somewhere in the middle rows, but it was enough. The dam broke. Murmurs erupted into full conversations, fans snapping open, heads turning to neighbors with eyes bright and hungry. "She's been jilted, poor thing. Well, I always said Pemberton was too good for her. Did you see her face?" Clara felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart that was still beating, still furious and alive, but something harder, the part of her that had believed the world was fair, that good behavior earned good outcomes, that if you followed the rules and smiled sweetly and never asked for too much, you'd be safe. That part died right there, in front of 300 witnesses. "Miss Whitmore?" The vicar's voice was gentle now, pitying, worse than the laughter. "I'm very sorry, but I believe we must conclude—" "No." Clara turned and walked down the aisle, not running, not hiding, walking with her head up and her spine straight, even as the whispers turned to outright gasps, even as her mother called her name in a voice edged with panic, even as the bouquet fell from her hands and scattered white petals across the stone floor like broken promises. She walked past every single person who'd come to watch her marry, past the Ashfords and the Tremaines and Lady Islington with her serpent smile, past the young girls who'd envied her and the old women who'd warned her and the men who'd looked at her like she was a prize Richard had won. She walked out into the London rain, and she didn't look back. The Whitmore house was silent when she returned. Clara stood in the foyer, soaked through, her wedding gown clinging to her legs like seaweed. Water dripped from her hair onto the marble floor. The servants had made themselves scarce, all except Mrs. Donnelly, the housekeeper, who appeared with a blanket and didn't say a word, just wrapped it around Clara's shoulders and squeezed once before disappearing again. Her parents arrived 20 minutes later. Her mother swept in first, still in her lavender silk, her face blotchy and furious. "What were you thinking, walking out like that? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done?" Clara's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "I didn't do anything, Mother. I showed up." "Don't be clever." Her father's voice was cold, measured. He removed his gloves with precise movements, not looking at her. "This is a disaster. We'll have to leave London. Go to the country house until this blows over." "It won't blow over," her mother snapped. "She's ruined, completely ruined. I'm standing right here." They both looked at her like they'd forgotten. Her mother's face twisted into something uglier than grief. "You should have stayed, waited in the church, made him come to you. Now you've made yourself look desperate and unstable." "He wasn't coming." "You don't know that—" "He wasn't coming." Clara's voice cracked the air like a whip. "And if he had, what then? I should have married a man who left me standing there for half an hour? A man who didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face? Her father's jaw tightened. You should have married a man who was willing to marry you. That's what you should have done. The words landed like a slap. Clara stared at him. At this man who'd taught her to ride, who'd called her his clever girl, who'd promised her the world would be kind if she was good, and felt the last thread of her old life snap clean. Get out, she said quietly. Her mother's eyes went wide. Excuse me? Get out of my sight, both of you. Clara, shut. Now. They left. They actually left. Clara stood alone in the foyer, wrapped in a blanket, her wedding gown pooling around her feet like a shipwreck. She waited for the tears to come, for the collapse, the breakdown, the hysterics everyone would expect. They didn't come. What came instead was something colder, harder, a decision. The letter arrived the next morning. Clara found it on the breakfast tray Mrs. Donnelly brought to her room. She hadn't left in 2 days, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything but stare at the ceiling and think, slipped between the teacup and the toast like a snake in the grass. Richard's handwriting. She'd have known it anywhere. Her hands didn't shake when she opened it. That surprised her. Dearest Clara, I hope this letter finds you well, though I imagine you are still quite upset. I want you to know that what happened was not meant to cause you pain. The truth is, I realized on the morning of our wedding that I could not go through with it. My feelings have changed, and I believe it would be dishonest to both of us to proceed with a marriage built on obligation rather than genuine affection. I have since discovered that my heart belongs to another, someone I should have recognized long ago. Miss Arabella Quinton and I have formed an understanding, and we plan to marry within the month. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me and to understand that this was for the best. You deserve someone who loves you wholly, and I am not that man. I wish you every happiness in your future endeavors. Yours in friendship, Richard. Clara read it twice. Then she laughed. It started as a choke, a gasp, something that could have been a sob if she'd let it. But it wasn't. It was laughter, raw and disbelieving and edged with something that tasted like fury. Yours in friendship. He'd humiliated her in front of all of London, shattered her reputation, destroyed her future, and he'd signed off with friendship. And Arabella Quinton. That made sense. The daughter of an earl, a dowry twice the size of Clara's, a family with connections that stretched into Parliament. Of course, Richard had chosen her. Of course, he'd waited until the last possible moment, maximizing his options, keeping Clara dangling just in case Arabella's father said no. She'd been his backup plan. The rage that filled her then was clean and bright and absolute. Clara stood, let the letter fall to the floor, and walked to her wardrobe. She pulled out a deep blue day dress. Not morning black, not pale pink, but something bold, something that said, "I'm still here," and rang for her maid. "Miss?" The girl appeared wide-eyed. "Are you—" "I'm going out." "Out? But miss, I don't think—" "I didn't ask what you thought." Clara's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I need you to help me dress, and then I need you to tell me everything you've heard the other servants saying about me." The maid's face went pale. "I couldn't possibly—" "Please," Clara met her eyes. "I need to know what I'm walking into." The girl hesitated, then whispered, "They're saying you went mad, that you ran from the church screaming, that Mr. Pemberton called it off because you were improper with another man." Clara's stomach turned, but she didn't let it show. "Who's spreading that?" "Miss Quinton's maid told our cook, and the footman heard Mr. Pemberton's valet saying you were cold, that you couldn't—" She trailed off, cheeks flaming. "I see." Clara's voice was ice. "Thank you for your honesty." She dressed carefully, pinned her hair with steady hands, and walked downstairs. Her mother intercepted her at the door. "Where do you think you're going?" "Out." "You can't. Clara, please just stay inside until—" "Until what? Until everyone forgets? They won't. Until Richard changes his mind? He won't. Until I disappear? I won't." "You'll make it worse." "It can't get worse, Mother." Clara pulled on her gloves. "They've already decided who I am. The least I can do is show them they're wrong." She left before her mother could respond. None. Hyde Park was full. Of course it was. A sunny afternoon, the season in full swing, everyone who mattered taking their constitutional stroll, seen and being seen. The perfect place for a scandal to parade herself. Clara felt every eye on her the moment she stepped onto the path. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Fans snapped open and closed in a flutter of silent communication that needed no words. That's her, the jilted bride. What is she doing here? Clara kept walking. Lady Islington appeared first, flanked by her daughters, all of them dressed in matching shades of smug. Miss Whitmore, how brave of you to venture out. Lady Islington, Clara's smile was sharp enough to cut. How lovely to see you. We were so sorry to hear about your misfortune. The word dripped with venom. Such a pity, but I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Perhaps a nice country gentleman? Someone less particular? One of the daughters giggled. Clara's fingers tightened around her parasol, but her voice stayed steady. Actually, I'm quite content as I am. Content? Lady Islington's eyebrows rose. My dear, you do understand that your prospects are… Excuse me. Clara stepped around them and kept walking. She heard the hiss of outrage behind her, the whispered, "How dare she?" But she didn't stop. She walked the entire length of the Serpentine, past every gossiping cluster, every pointed stare, every pitying smile. She walked until her feet hurt, and her face ached from holding it together, and her lungs burned with the effort of not screaming. And then she saw him. Richard. He was sitting on a bench near the water with Arabella Quinton, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, both of them laughing like they were in a painting of perfect happiness. He looked up. Their eyes met. Richard's smile faltered. He stood, started to move toward her. Clara turned and walked away. Not running, not hiding, just done. She made it home before the tears came. Mrs. Donnelly found her in the drawing room, still in her blue dress, staring at nothing. Oh, child. I'm fine. No, you're not. Clara looked up at her, this woman who'd been more of a mother than her own, and felt something break. What do I do? Mrs. Donnelly sat beside her, took her hand. You survive, that's what you do. You get up every day and you survive. And one day you'll realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. They hate me. They fear you. Clara laughed, bitter. Fear? They pity me. No. Mrs. Donnelly squeezed her hand. They pity what happened to you, but they fear what you'll do next. Because you didn't run. You didn't hide. You walked into that park like you owned it, and that terrifies them. Why? Because if you can survive this, what else might you survive? What else might you refuse to accept? She smiled, sad and knowing. You're dangerous now, Clara. You're a woman who has nothing left to lose. Clara sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, Good. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in endurance. Clara attended every event she was invited to, and some she wasn't. She went to the theater, the opera, the museum. She walked in the park every afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock. She smiled at people who wouldn't smile back and made small talk with women who looked through her like she was glass. She refused to disappear. Her parents stopped trying to control her after the first week. Her mother retreated into migraines and laudanum. Her father buried himself in his study and pretended his daughter didn't exist. Fine. Clara didn't need them. What she needed was a plan. She started reading, not novels, not poetry, but newspapers, financial reports, parliamentary records. She learned who owned what, who owed whom, where the real power in London lived. Not in ballrooms and drawing rooms, but in banks and boardrooms and backroom deals. She learned that reputation was currency, yes, but so was information. And she learned that the world was much bigger than the small, suffocating circle that had tried to destroy her. It was on one of these afternoons, buried in a copy of the Times in her father's study, that she found the notice. The Duke of Ashford announces the return of his son, Adrian Hale, Duke of Thornfield, from military service in the Crimea. His Grace will be in residence at Thornfield House for the season. Clara stared at the words. She'd heard of Adrian Hale. Everyone had. The war hero, the Ice Duke. The man who'd come back from Crimea with a chest full of medals and a reputation for being impossible to impress, impossible to charm, impossible to reach. The man who, rumor had it, hated London society almost as much as she did. An idea began to form. Dangerous. Probably stupid. But then again, what did she have to lose? Admit, the Ashford Ball was the event of the season. Clara wore black. Not mourning black. She wasn't mourning anything, but black silk that gleamed like oil in lamplight, cut low enough to be daring, high enough to be respectable. She'd piled her hair high, left her neck bare, and walked into that ballroom like she was there to declare war. The whispers started immediately. Is that... She's wearing black. The nerve! Clara ignored them all. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant, took a position near the wall where she could see the entire room, and waited. Adrian Hale arrived late. She knew it was him before anyone said his name, the way the crowd parted, the way conversation stuttered and died, the sheer presence he brought into the room like a cold wind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired. His face was all hard angles and old scars, a thin white line cutting through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. He moved like a soldier, economical and precise, and his eyes, gray, cold, assessing, swept the room like he was looking for threats. They landed on Clara, held. She didn't look away. Most women would have. Most women would have blushed and giggled and pretended they hadn't been staring, but Clara just lifted her chin and met his gaze head on, unblinking, unflinching. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite interest. Recognition, maybe? Of something familiar. Then Lady Ashford descended on him with a flock of eligible daughters, and the moment broke. Clara turned away, set down her champagne, and started for the terrace. She'd made it halfway across the ballroom when a hand caught her elbow. Leaving so soon? She turned. Richard. He looked good, too good, damn him, in his evening clothes with his perfect hair and his perfect smile. Arabella stood a few feet away, watching with narrowed eyes. Let go of me, Clara said quietly. I just want to talk. We have nothing to talk about. His grip tightened. Clara, please. I know you're angry. Angry? She laughed, short and sharp. I'm not angry, Richard. I'm done. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. She tried to pull away. He held on. You're making a scene, he hissed. Then let go. Not until you listen. The lady said let go. The voice was low, cold, edged with something that promised violence. Richard's hand dropped like he'd been burned. Adrian Hale stood behind him, close enough to be a threat, far enough to be polite. His eyes were on Richard, flat and dangerous. Your Grace. Richard's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. I was just leaving. Adrian's tone made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. Richard hesitated, looked at Clara. Go, she said. He went. Adrian watched him disappear into the crowd, then turned to Clara. Up close, he was even more imposing, 6 inches taller than her, shoulders that could have been carved from stone, and those eyes that saw too much. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine. That didn't look fine. I said I'm fine. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. He started to walk away. Wait, Clara said. He stopped, turned back. She met his eyes and said, Thank you. For what? For not assuming I needed saving. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or amusement. You didn't seem like you needed it. I didn't. I know. They stood there, two people who'd been broken in different ways, and something passed between them that had no name. Not attraction, not yet. Not trust. But recognition. The acknowledgement that they were both standing in a room full of people who didn't understand them and never would. I'm Adrian, he said finally. I know who you are. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. And you're Clara Whitmore, the infamous jilted bride. Most people wouldn't have said it out loud, would have danced around it, pretended not to know, drowned in false politeness. Clara liked him immediately. That's me, she said. The scandal of the season. Good. She blinked. Good? Means you're interesting. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Most people here aren't. Before Clara could respond, a bell rang. Dinner was being announced. Couples were forming up to process into the dining room. Adrian held out his arm. "May I?" Clara looked at his arm, at his scarred face, at the room full of people who would absolutely lose their minds if she walked in on the arm of the most eligible duke in England. She smiled. "You may." She took his arm, and together they walked into dinner while London burned with gossip behind them. Dinner was a battlefield dressed in fine china and crystal. Clara sat 3 seats down from Adrian, diagonal enough that she could see him, but not close enough to speak without raising her voice. Lady Ashford had arranged the seating with surgical precision, duchesses and earls at the head, everyone else arranged by title and marriageability, and Clara tucked near the end between a deaf baronet and a vicar who kept trying to save her soul. "Miss Whitmore," the vicar said for the 3rd time, leaning close enough that she could smell the port on his breath. "I do hope you've been seeking comfort in Scripture during this difficult time." "I've been seeking comfort in financial newspapers, actually," Clara said. "Much more reliable." The vicar blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The market reports, very soothing. All those numbers that don't lie or leave you at altars." Across the table, someone choked on their wine. The vicar's face went pink. "Miss Whitmore, I hardly think—" "Tell me, vicar," Clara interrupted, turning to face him fully. "Do you believe everything happens for a reason?" "Well, yes, naturally." "Then Richard Pemberton humiliating me in front of all of London was part of some divine plan." His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Because if it was," Clara continued, her voice sweet as poison, "then whoever's running that plan has a terrible sense of humor, or competence, possibly both." The table had gone silent. The vicar stammered something about mysterious ways and excused himself to find a servant. Clara took a sip of wine and glanced up to find Adrian watching her, one eyebrow raised. His mouth twitched at the corner. Not quite a smile, but close. She lifted her glass slightly in acknowledgement. He returned the gesture. Lady Ashford, seated at the head of the table in a gown that probably cost more than Clara's dowry, cleared her throat with the force of a cannon blast. "Miss Whitmore, I understand you've been quite the subject of conversation lately." The table's attention swung back like a pendulum. "Have I?" Clara kept her voice light, bored even. "How exhausting for everyone." "Indeed." Lady Ashford's smile could have cut glass. "Though I must say your resilience is admirable. Most young women in your position would have fled to the country by now." "Most young women in my position haven't been publicly destroyed," Clara said. "I suppose I'm breaking new ground." A few gasps, one nervous laugh. Lady Ashford's smile sharpened. "How modern of you!" "How medieval of everyone else." Adrian coughed into his napkin. It might have been covering a laugh. The conversation moved on. Someone launched into a tedious story about their country estate, the kind of safe, boring topic that filled the gaps between real conflict, and Clara let herself breathe again. Her heart was hammering. Her hands wanted to shake. But she'd done it. She'd sat in a room full of people who hated her, and she hadn't broken. Small victories. After dinner, the women retreated to the drawing room while the men stayed behind for port and cigars. Clara found herself trapped on a settee between 2 of Lady Ashford's friends, both of whom spoke about her as if she weren't there. "Poor thing," one of them murmured. "I heard Pemberton's already set a date with the Quinton girl." "Next month," the other confirmed. "St. George's, naturally. Arabella's dress is being made by the same modiste who did Princess Victoria's." "How lovely for them." "One does wonder what Miss Whitmore did to drive him away." Clara stood abruptly. "Excuse me, I need air." She walked out before they could respond, through the drawing room, past the card tables and the gossip clusters, out onto the terrace where the night was cold and sharp and blessedly quiet. London spread out below her, 1,000 lights in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably laughing with Arabella. Somewhere, her parents were pretending she didn't exist. Somewhere, the whole city was talking about her like she was a cautionary tale instead of a person. "Thought I'd find you here." Clara didn't turn. "Are you following me, Your Grace?" "Adrian." He came to stand beside her at the railing, not too close, not touching. "And no, I just know what it's like to need to escape." "The war?" "Among other things." They stood in silence for a moment. The noise from inside was muffled here, distant, almost peaceful. They're vultures, Clara said finally. Yes. Every single one of them. Yes. And you came back to this. Why? Adrian's jaw tightened. Duty. My father's dying. Someone has to manage the estate, attend parliament, do all the things a duke is supposed to do. He paused. I'd rather be back in the Crimea, honestly. At least there, when someone wanted you dead, they had the decency to shoot at you. Clara laughed, sharp and startled and real. That's awful. But true. She looked at him then, really looked. The scars on his face weren't just from war, she realized. There was something deeper there, something carved into the way he held himself, like he was always braced for impact. What happened to you? She asked. The same thing that happened to you, just a different uniform. Before she could ask what he meant, the terrace door opened and Richard stepped out. Of course. He stopped when he saw them, his expression flickering through surprise, confusion, something that might have been jealousy. Clara? Don't, she said. I just want to talk. We've done this already. The answer's still no. Richard's eyes cut to Adrian, then back. Is this about him? Are you trying to make me jealous? Clara stared at him, actually stared because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're marrying Arabella Quinton in a month. That's different. How? Because He stopped, seemed to realize how insane he sounded. Clara, please, just give me 5 minutes. No. You owe me that much. I owe you nothing. Her voice cracked like a whip. You left me at the altar, Richard. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know, and now you're angry that I'm not falling apart? That I'm not waiting around for you to decide I'm worth your time? That's not... Get out of my sight. Richard's face went red. You think you're better than me now because the Ice Duke here feels sorry for you? Adrian moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just a single step that put him between Clara and Richard. I think you should leave, he said quietly. This is none of your business. It is now. They stared at each other, Richard with his pretty boy face twisted in anger, Adrian with his soldier's calm and those cold, cold eyes. And Clara saw the exact moment Richard realized he'd lose this fight. He stepped back. You're making a mistake, Clara. No, she said. I already made that mistake. You were it. Richard left. Clara's hands were shaking. She gripped the railing hard enough to hurt, trying to breathe, trying not to scream or cry or do anything that would prove them all right. You all right? Adrian asked. Stop asking me that. All right. He stayed beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there, solid and real and not demanding anything from her. After a long moment, Clara said, I need to do something. Like what? I don't know yet. Something big, something that makes them all choke on their gossip. Adrian smiled. A real one this time, sharp and dangerous. Now that I can help with. The plan started small. Clara began attending events with Adrian. Not every event, not enough to look desperate, but enough that people noticed. The opera, the museum, a lecture on Eastern philosophy that was numbingly boring but gave them 2 hours to sit side by side and make quiet, vicious commentary about everyone around them. The gossip shifted. It wasn't about her being jilted anymore. It was about her and the Duke. What were they doing? Were they courting? Surely not. He was far too important for damaged goods like her. Unless, was he using her for something? Was she using him? Clara didn't care what they thought. What she cared about was the way Richard's face looked every time he saw them together, the way Arabella's smile got tighter, the way her mother actually looked at her again, calculating, wondering if maybe Clara could still be salvaged after all. You know they're going to tear you apart for this, Adrian said one afternoon. They were in his study at Thornfield House, supposedly reviewing estate documents, but actually drinking excellent whiskey and comparing notes on who in society deserved to be thrown into the Thames. They're already tearing me apart, Clara pointed out. At least this way I'm doing something interesting while they do it. Fair point? He poured her another finger of whiskey. But when this gets worse, and it will, you need to be ready. I'm ready. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're still angry, and anger's useful, but it's not armor. Clara set down her glass. What would you know about it? Everything. His voice was flat, matter of fact. I came back from the war angry. At the officers who sent us into slaughter, at the politicians who started it, at everyone back here who treated it like a game. I was so angry I could barely speak without wanting to hit something. What changed? I realized anger was easy. It's simple and clean and it makes you feel powerful, but it's also stupid. He met her eyes. It makes you predictable, and predictable gets you killed. This isn't war, isn't it? Clara thought about that, about the whispers and the stares and the way Lady Islington had smiled when she saw Clara's mother crying at the modiste, about Richard's letter with its poisonous politeness, about every door that had closed in her face, every invitation that had stopped coming. So what do I do? She asked. You stop fighting their fight. You stop trying to prove them wrong or make them sorry, or whatever it is you think will fix this. He leaned forward. You build something new, something they can't touch. Like what? That's up to you. The idea came to her 3 days later, in the middle of another soul-crushing tea party where women pretended to care about charity while really just comparing jewelry and husbands. Clara was sitting in Lady Pemberton's drawing room. Yes, Richard's mother, because apparently Clara's capacity for self-punishment knew no bounds, listening to someone drone on about a fund for orphans. The fund was real enough, but the woman talking about it had never actually visited an orphanage, never spoken to a child who wasn't her own pampered offspring. It was all performance, all show. And Clara realized that was the whole game. Everything in this world was performance. The marriages, the balls, the careful display of wealth and breeding and propriety. Nobody actually cared about anything. They just cared about looking like they cared. So what if she stopped performing? What if she actually did something? She stood abruptly, cutting off the orphan lady mid-sentence. Excuse me, Clara said. I need to leave. Every head turned. Leave? Lady Pemberton's smile was ice. But we've barely started. Yes, well, I've just realized I'm wasting my time. The room went silent. I beg your pardon? Clara picked up her reticule, her gloves. You're all sitting here talking about orphans like they're pets in a charity auction, but none of you have actually done anything to help them. You just like the way it sounds when you say you care. Someone gasped. Miss Whitmore, Lady Pemberton said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You are being unforgivably rude. Good. Maybe someone will finally pay attention. She walked out. Her maid caught up with her in the hallway, eyes wide with panic. Miss, what are you doing? Something stupid, probably. Clara pulled on her gloves. Take the carriage home. I'm going somewhere. Where? Clara smiled. To actually see an orphanage. St. Mary's Home for Destitute Children was in Southwark, which was a polite way of saying it was in the part of London where ladies like Clara never went. The streets were narrow and filthy, the buildings crammed together like bad teeth, and the smell was something Clara would remember for the rest of her life. She paid the driver extra to wait and knocked on a door that looked like it would fall off its hinges. A woman answered, gray-haired, exhausted, suspicious. What do you want? I want to help. The woman looked her up and down, taking in the fine dress, the clean gloves, the utter absurdity of a society lady standing in the middle of Southwark. We don't need prayers. Good. I'm not offering any. Clara met her eyes. I'm offering money and time and whatever else you actually need. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. Come in. What Clara saw inside gutted her. Children everywhere, dozens of them, thin and dirty and wearing clothes that had been mended so many times they were more patches than fabric. They slept on pallets on the floor, 3 or 4 to a blanket. The room was freezing. There was one fireplace for the whole building and not enough coal to keep it burning. We get a stipend from the parish, the woman, Mrs. Hartley, explained. Barely enough to feed them, let alone clothe them or teach them anything useful. Most of them end up on the streets by 12. The boys turn to thieving, the girls to... She trailed off. Clara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. How much would you need to actually take care of them? Mrs. Hartley laughed, bitter. More than you've got, miss, even with your fancy friends and their charity teas. Try me. So Mrs. Hartley did. She laid out the numbers, what it would cost for food, for coal, for proper beds and blankets, for a teacher, for medicine when the children got sick. It was more than Clara had thought. It was less than her dowry, the dowry that was sitting in a bank, untouched, because she was unmarried and according to her father's will, she couldn't access it without a husband's permission. Except, Clara's mind started racing. There was a loophole. There had to be some legal technicality that would let her use her own money for her own purposes. She just had to find it. "I'll be back," she told Mrs. Hartley. 3 days, maybe less." "What are you going to do?" "Something my father would hate." Clara smiled. "Which means it's probably the right thing." She went to Adrian. He was in his study, buried in estate ledgers, and looked up when she burst in without knocking. "Clara?" "I need a lawyer," she said. "A good one. Someone who isn't afraid to argue with judges and break a few rules." Adrian set down his pen. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet, but I'm about to." She told him everything, the orphanage, the money, the plan. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he said, "Your father will disown you." "He's barely speaking to me now. What difference does it make?" "And society will crucify you. They'll say you're trying to buy redemption." "Let them." Clara leaned forward. "I don't care what they say anymore, Adrian. I care about those children freezing to death while we sit in ballrooms drinking champagne." He studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a file. "Thomas Brennan, best legal mind in London, specializes in trust law and making rich men very angry." He handed her a card. "Tell him I sent you." Clara took the card, feeling something tight in her chest loosen. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly." "Good," Clara said. "I'm tired of pretty." Thomas Brennan was exactly what Clara needed. Sharp, ruthless, and completely unimpressed by titles or tears. He listened to her situation, read through her father's will, and spent 3 days finding the crack in the armor. "Your dowry was set up as an irrevocable trust," he explained when she came back to his office. "Your father can't touch it without your consent, but the trustee, your uncle, has discretionary power to distribute funds for your maintenance and welfare. Which means if we can argue that supporting the orphanage constitutes your welfare, say, for your education or moral improvement, we can force the distribution." Clara blinked. "That's insane." "That's trust law." Brennan smiled like a shark. "But here's the catch. We'll have to petition the Court of Chancery. Public proceeding. Your father will fight it, and everyone in London will know exactly what you're doing." "How long?" 2 months, maybe 3. Clara thought about the children sleeping on the floor, about Mrs. Hartley's tired eyes, about Richard and Arabella planning their wedding while pretending Clara didn't exist. "Do it," she said. The petition was filed on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was in every newspaper in London. "Jilted bride sues family for charity funds." The scandal was immediate and absolute. Her father sent a letter calling her ungrateful and threatening to cut her off entirely, which would have been more impressive if he hadn't already done that emotionally. Her mother showed up at the house in hysterics, wailing about the family name and reputation. Clara had Mrs. Donnelly turn her away at the door. The society response was split. Half of them were horrified. A woman suing her own family was unthinkable, unnatural, proof that Clara had completely lost her mind. The other half were fascinated, watching this train wreck with the kind of gleeful attention usually reserved for public executions. Richard sent a note. "This is beneath you." Clara burned it. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, she became London's favorite topic of conversation all over again, not as the jilted bride this time, but as something worse. The madwoman, the ungrateful daughter, the girl who'd lost her mind after being abandoned. Clara went to the orphanage every Tuesday and Friday. She brought food the first time, proper food, not gruel, and watched the children fall on it like they'd never eaten before. She brought blankets the second time, and coal, paying for it out of the household accounts her father couldn't control. "You don't have to do this," Mrs. Hartley said after the 3rd visit. "Not before the court rules." "I know," Clara said. "But they're cold now. Not in 2 months." She started teaching some of the older children to read. started learning their names, started understanding that these weren't abstract problems or charity cases. They were people, small and scared and utterly ignored by the world that had created them. And she got angry all over again. Not the hot, desperate anger from before. Something colder, more focused. This was what the world did. It built systems that crushed people, then blamed those people for being crushed. It dressed up cruelty in manners and propriety and called it civilization. Clara was done being polite to that world. The confrontation came at the Worthington Musicale. Clara had almost skipped it. She was tired, her feet hurt from walking through Southwark, and the idea of listening to someone's untalented daughter murder Mozart was physically painful. But Adrian had sent a note saying he'd be there, and she found she didn't want to face the vultures alone. She arrived late, slipping into the back of the music room just as some girl in pink started warbling her way through an aria. Adrian was in the corner, looking like he wanted to murder the piano. He caught her eye, and his expression shifted into something almost relieved. She was making her way toward him when Arabella Quinton stepped into her path. "Clara," she said, her voice sugar-sweet and poisonous. "How lovely to see you." Clara stopped. "Arabella, I've been reading about your little charity project. How noble of you. Is there something you want?" Arabella's smile sharpened. "Just to thank you, really. If you hadn't been so difficult, Richard never would have looked my way. So in a sense, I owe my happiness to your failure." The music room had gone quiet. The girl in pink trailed off mid-note. Everyone was watching. Clara could feel Adrian tense across the room, ready to intervene. Could feel the weight of 300 eyes waiting to see if she'd break. She smiled instead. "You're welcome," she said calmly. "I'd hate to think of Richard settling for his first choice when his backup plan worked out so well." Arabella's face went white. "And Arabella?" Clara stepped closer, lowered her voice just enough that only they could hear. "When he leaves you standing at an altar someday, and he will, because that's who he is, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember that I tried to warn you by example." She walked past her, past the staring crowd, straight to Adrian. "We're leaving," she said. "About time." They walked out together while the whispers erupted behind them. Outside in the cool night air, Clara started laughing. She couldn't help it, the absurdity of it all, the stupid games, the petty cruelty dressed up as etiquette. "That was reckless," Adrian said, but he was smiling too. "I'm feeling reckless." "I noticed." They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. Then Adrian said, "You're different." "How?" "Sharper, less..." He searched for the word. "Less apologetic." Clara thought about that, about who she'd been 2 months ago. The girl who'd believed being good meant being quiet, being safe meant being small. "I got tired of apologizing," she said, "for existing, for being inconvenient, for not disappearing when everyone wanted me to. I'm done with that." "Good. Is it?" "Because I'm about to drag my family through court and probably destroy whatever's left of my reputation." Adrian stopped walking, turned to face her. "Your reputation was destroyed the moment Pemberton didn't show up. Nothing you do now can make that worse, so you might as well do something that matters." Clara looked at him. This man with his scars and his brutal honesty, who'd seen actual war and come back harder for it. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because you remind me of someone." "Who?" "Me. Before I learned to stop caring what they thought." He smiled, thin and sharp. "And because watching you set fire to high society is the most entertaining thing I've seen since I got back." Before Clara could respond, a carriage pulled up beside them. Richard leaned out the window. "Clara, get in." She stared at him. "Absolutely not. We need to talk, now." "No, we don't. It's about the court case. I can help." "I don't want your help." Richard's expression twisted into something ugly. "You're making a fool of yourself, suing your own father, running around Southwark like some kind of reformer. Better than running around London like a coward." His face went red. The carriage door swung open and he stepped out, and Clara saw something dangerous in his eyes. Adrian moved, putting himself between them. "That's close enough." "This doesn't concern you," Richard snapped. It does now. They faced each other, Richard with his pretty boy rage, Adrian with his soldier's calm, and Clara saw the exact moment this stopped being about her and became about something else. Territory, power, male pride dressed up as protection. Stop, she said. Neither of them moved. I said stop. Clara stepped around Adrian, faced Richard directly. You don't get to do this. You don't get to ignore me for weeks and then show up demanding my attention. You don't get to marry someone else and still act like I'm yours. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. And now you get to live with it. She took a breath, steadied herself. Go home to Arabella, Richard. Live your perfect life. Just leave me out of it. For a moment, she thought he'd actually listen. Then his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. You don't understand what you're doing. Adrian's fist connected with Richard's jaw before Clara could even process what was happening. Richard went down hard, sprawling on the cobblestones. Blood streamed from his nose. He looked up at Adrian with shock and fury, and something that might have been fear. Touch her again, Adrian said quietly, and I'll break more than your nose. Richard scrambled back to his carriage, blood dripping down his chin. You'll regret this, he spat. Both of you. The carriage pulled away. Clara stood there, her wrist still tingling where Richard had grabbed it, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Are you all right? Adrian asked for the third time that night. This time, Clara didn't snap at him. No, she said honestly, but I will be. He nodded, flexing his hand. His knuckles were split. We should go, before he comes back with reinforcements. He won't. How do you know? Because he's a coward, and cowards don't fight fair. They just make sure everyone else pays for their mistakes. Adrian looked at her with something that might have been respect, or recognition, or the beginning of something that scared Clara more than anything Richard could do. Come on, he said. I'll walk you home. They walked through London in silence, and Clara felt the weight of what she'd started settling on her shoulders. The court case, the orphanage, the bridges she was burning with every choice. But for the first time since the wedding that never happened, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. And that, she thought, was worth whatever came next. The scandal exploded the next morning. Clara woke to Mrs. Donnelly shaking her shoulder, the housekeeper's face pale and tight. Miss, you need to see this. Every newspaper in London carried the same story, variations on a theme that made Clara's stomach drop. Duke assaults gentleman over fallen woman. Thornfield's violence. Has war made him unstable? Pemberton, injured defending former fiancé. From aggressive Duke. Clara read them all, each one worse than the last. They painted Richard as the noble hero, trying to protect her from Adrian's unwanted advances. They painted Adrian as a damaged war veteran with a violent streak, and they painted Clara as the catalyst, the ruined woman causing chaos wherever she went. It's all lies, Mrs. Donnelly said. Of course it is. Clara set down the papers, her hands surprisingly steady. But the truth doesn't matter. It never does. A knock at the door, her father's valet, stiff and disapproving. Miss Whitmore, your father requires your presence, immediately. Clara almost laughed. After weeks of silence, now he wanted to talk. She dressed carefully, armor, not fashion, and went downstairs. Her father was in his study, the newspapers spread across his desk like evidence at a trial. He didn't look up when she entered. Sit down. I'll stand. His jaw tightened. I have just received a visit from Lord Pemberton. His son's nose is broken. There are witnesses who saw the Duke of Thornfield strike him without provocation. There was provocation. That is not what the witnesses say. Then the witnesses are lying. Her father finally looked at her, and the contempt in his eyes was so pure it should have hurt. It didn't. This ends now. You will withdraw your petition to the court. You will issue a public apology to Richard Pemberton, and you will retire to our country estate until this matter is forgotten. No, it was not a request. And that wasn't an answer that will change. Clara met his gaze without flinching. I'm not withdrawing anything. I'm not apologizing. And I'm certainly not hiding. Then you leave me no choice. Her father stood, pulled a document from his desk drawer. I am formally disowning you. Effective immediately. You are no longer my daughter. You will have no claim to the family name, no access to family funds, and no place in this house. The words should have destroyed her. 3 months ago they would have. Now Clara just felt tired. Fine, she said. Her father blinked. Fine. You've barely acknowledged my existence for weeks. This just makes it official. She turned toward the door. I'll be out by tonight. Clara. She stopped, looked back. For a moment she thought she saw something flicker in his face. Regret, maybe. Or just the realization that he'd lost something he couldn't get back. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, he said. No, Clara said quietly. The biggest mistake of my life was believing you'd protect me. Everything after that has been fixing it. She walked out and didn't look back. So, by noon, the eviction was complete. Clara stood on the street with 2 trunks, a hat box, and Mrs. Donnelly, who'd refused to stay in the house without her. The other servants had watched from the windows, silent and sympathetic but too afraid to help. Where will we go? Mrs. Donnelly asked. Clara had no idea. A carriage pulled up. Adrian stepped out, took one look at the trunks, and said, Get in. I can't just... You can argue with me in the carriage, or you can argue with me on the street. Your choice. Clara got in. He took them to Thornfield House, which was massive and cold and exactly what Clara would have expected from a man who'd spent years sleeping in military tents. Mrs. Donnelly was set up in the servants' quarters, though she insisted on still acting as Clara's lady's maid, and Clara was given a suite of rooms on the 2nd floor that was bigger than her entire bedroom at home. This is temporary, she told Adrian when he showed her to her rooms. Just until I figure out, stay as long as you need. People will talk. People are already talking. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with those sharp gray eyes. The question is whether you care. Clara thought about her father's face, about the newspapers screaming lies, about Richard playing the victim while planning his wedding. No, she said. I really don't. Good. Then you're learning. That evening, Adrian's solicitor arrived with news. The court hearing had been moved up. Someone had filed a motion to expedite, citing Clara's unstable living situation as evidence that she was unfit to manage charitable funds. Who filed it? Clara asked. The solicitor looked uncomfortable. Your uncle. The trustee. Of course. Her father's brother, who'd probably been promised a cut of the dowry if he helped block the petition. Can we fight it? We can try. But Miss Whitmore, I have to be honest. Your situation is not helping. Living here, unchaperoned with a bachelor duke who just assaulted your former fiancé, he trailed off delicately. Sounds bad, Adrian finished. It sounds like exactly what they've been saying about her, that she's reckless, improper, unfit to manage her own affairs. Clara felt the trap closing around her. Every move she made gave them ammunition. Every choice proved their point. So what do I do? She asked. Disappear? Apologize? Prove them right by giving up? The solicitor had no answer. Adrian did. You marry me. Clara stared at him. What? Marry me. Solves every problem. He ticked them off on his fingers. Gives you access to your dowry as a married woman. Makes your living here respectable. Cuts off every argument they're making about your fitness and propriety. That's insane. That's practical. We barely know each other. We know enough. He looked at her steadily. I know you're smart and stubborn, and you don't break when you're supposed to. You know I don't care about society's opinion, and I won't try to control you. That's more than most marriages start with. Clara's mind was racing. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. It would also work. What do you get out of this? She asked. Adrian's expression shifted, something darker crossing his face. My father's dying. He wants me settled before he goes. A wife, an heir, the whole performance. I don't want some simpering girl who'll expect me to be something I'm not. You don't need me to be anything but honest. This is a business arrangement. Yes? No pretense of love or affection. None. Clara looked at him, really looked, at the scars and the hard edges and the man who'd stepped between her and Richard without hesitation, who'd offered her a weapon when everyone else offered pity. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want terms. Name them. I keep control of my dowry, all of it. You don't touch it without my permission. Agreed. I continue my work with the orphanage. You don't interfere. Wouldn't dream of it. And if either of us wants out, for any reason, we find a way to end this without destroying each other. Adrian held out his hand. Deal. Clara shook it. They were engaged. The announcement hit London like a bomb. Fallen woman snares. Duke Thornfield to Mary Pemberton's cast-off. A marriage of scandal. What is the Duke thinking? The reactions were immediate and vicious. Clara was a schemer, a manipulator, a woman who'd used her ruin to trap an eligible duke. Adrian was mad, clearly damaged from the war, making decisions no sane man would make. Richard showed up at Thornfield House 3 days after the announcement. Clara was in the library, reviewing the orphanage accounts, when the butler announced him. She almost said no. Almost had him thrown out. But she wanted to see his face. He looked terrible. His nose was splinted and bruised, his eyes bloodshot. He'd been drinking, she could smell it from across the room. This is revenge, he said without preamble. This is moving on. You don't love him. I didn't love you either. Took me a while to realize it. Richard flinched like she'd slapped him. That's not true. Isn't it? I loved the idea of you, the future you represented. But you, Richard Pemberton, the actual person? Clara set down her pen. I don't think I ever knew you well enough to love you. And him? You know him? Better than I knew you. He hit me. You grabbed me. Clara's voice went cold. You put your hands on me without permission, and he stopped you. That's not assault. That's consequence. Richard's hands clenched into fists. For a moment she thought he might actually try to hit her. Then he seemed to deflate, all the anger draining out of him into something that looked almost like grief. I made a mistake, he said quietly. Leaving you. I see that now. You made several mistakes. That was just the first. Bella's not... He stopped himself. Not what? Not me? I should hope not. Clara stood, moved to the window where she could see him reflected in the glass without having to look at him directly. Go home, Richard. Marry your heiress. Live your life. Just stop pretending any of this was about me. What's that supposed to mean? It means you didn't leave me because you stopped loving me. You left because Arabella was a better offer, more money, better connections, fewer complications. And now you're angry because I'm not playing my part. What part? The heartbroken girl pining for you, the cautionary tale. The one who proves you made the right choice by staying miserable. She turned to face him. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be happy. Or at least I'm going to try. Richard stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Then he left without another word. Clara waited until she heard the front door close before she let herself shake. Adrian found her there 10 minutes later, still standing at the window, her arms wrapped around herself. You all right? Stop asking me that. Not until you start answering honestly. Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. I'm terrified. Is that honest enough? Of what? Everything. This marriage, the court case, waking up and realizing I've made everything worse. She turned to face him. What if they're right? What if I am ruined and reckless and completely out of my depth? Adrian crossed the room, stood close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Then you're out of your depth with someone who's been drowning in deep water since the Crimea. We'll figure it out. That's not reassuring. It's honest. She almost smiled. Almost. The wedding's in 2 weeks, Adrian said. Small ceremony, just witnesses and the vicar. Unless you want something bigger, no, small is good. Small is... Clara took a breath. Small is all I can handle right now. Fair enough. He started to leave, then stopped at the door. Clara, for what it's worth, I don't think you're ruined. I think you're the only person in this whole damn city who's figured out that the game's rigged and decided to play anyway. After he left, Clara stood alone in the library and tried to believe him. The court hearing was scheduled for the day before the wedding. Clara walked into the Court of Chancery in a dark green dress that Arabella's fashion magazines would have called severe and Clara called armor. Her solicitor, Mr. Brennan, met her at the entrance, his expression grim. "Your uncle's brought representation," he warned. "Dalton Pierce. He's expensive, and he's good." "So are you." "Yes, but he's also got the sympathy vote. Concerned family member trying to protect a troubled young woman from herself." "I'm not troubled." "Try telling that to the judge." The courtroom was packed. Clara recognized half of London society crammed into the gallery, not because they cared about trust law, but because they wanted to watch her humiliated one more time. Her uncle sat at the opposing table, looking sorrowful and noble. Her father was beside him, staring straight ahead like Clara didn't exist. Adrian was in the back row, the only friendly face in the crowd. The judge entered, Lord Chancellor Holbrook, ancient and severe, and the hearing began. Her uncle's lawyer went first, painting Clara as unhinged. The abandoned bride who'd lost her mind, who was squandering family resources on a doomed charity project, who was marrying a violent duke in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. "Miss Whitmore has shown consistent poor judgment," Pierce argued. "Her engagement to Mr. Pemberton ended in scandal. Her current engagement is equally suspect. She is living unchaperoned with a man known for violent outbursts, and now she wants access to £50,000 to fund an orphanage in one of London's most dangerous neighborhoods." He made it sound insane. Mr. Brennan stood for the defense. Miss Whitmore's engagement to Mr. Pemberton ended because he abandoned her, not through any fault of her own. Her engagement to the Duke of Thornfield is respectable and soon to be formalized, and her desire to fund the orphanage is not only reasonable, but admirable. She is using her resources to help children in desperate need. "By whose assessment?" the judge asked. "By anyone who's actually visited St. Mary's Home for Destitute Children and seen the conditions there." "Has Miss Whitmore visited?" "Multiple times, Your Honor." A murmur went through the gallery. Ladies didn't visit Southwark. Ladies didn't see poverty up close. Pierce jumped on it. "Your Honor, this only proves my point. Miss Whitmore is engaging in reckless behavior, visiting dangerous neighborhoods, associating with the lowest classes." "Helping children," Clara said. The room went silent. The judge looked at her. "Miss Whitmore, you are not to speak unless addressed directly." "Then address me directly," Clara said, standing, "because I'm tired of being talked about like I'm not here." Mr. Brennan grabbed her arm. "Clara, don't." She pulled away, walked to the center of the courtroom. Every eye was on her. She could feel the weight of it, the judgment, the anticipation of watching her break. She didn't break. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I am not insane. I am not reckless. I am a woman who was publicly humiliated through no fault of my own, and instead of disappearing like everyone expected, I chose to do something useful. Miss Whitmore, I visited St. Mary's 6 times. I've seen children sleeping on floors in the middle of winter. I've seen them go hungry because there's not enough food. I've seen them sick with no medicine, dirty because there's no soap, hopeless because there's no future." Her voice was steady, fierce. "And I've seen a city full of wealthy people who claim to care about charity, but have never actually looked at the people they're supposedly helping." The gallery was dead silent. "You want to know if I'm fit to manage my own money?" Clara continued. "Ask me why I want it. Ask me what I plan to do. Ask me anything except whether I'm respectable enough to deserve basic autonomy." The judge studied her for a long moment. "Very well," he said. "What do you plan to do with the funds?" Clara took a breath. This was it. "I plan to purchase the building that houses St. Mary's. It's currently leased year to year, which means the children can be evicted at any time. I plan to hire a full-time staff, a teacher, a nurse, a cook. I plan to provide proper beds, clothing, food. I plan to establish apprenticeships for the older children so they have actual prospects instead of just turning to crime." She paused. "And I plan to open a second location within a year." Another murmur from the gallery. Pierce stood. "Your Honor, this is fantasy. Miss Whitmore has no experience managing such an endeavor." "I have a business plan," Clara interrupted, "prepared by Mr. Thomas Brennan and reviewed by 3 separate accountants. I have letters of support from members of Parliament, church leaders, and the magistrate of Southwark. I have a board of trustees prepared to oversee the project, and I have the will to see it through." She pulled the documents from her bag, she'd brought them just in case, and handed them to the clerk. The judge looked through them, his expression unreadable. "This is thorough," he said finally. "I'm not playing at charity, Your Honor. This is my life's work." The judge set down the papers. "Miss Whitmore, you understand that if I grant this petition, you will be setting a precedent. Other women may use this case to argue for similar access to their own funds." "Good." Pierce actually gasped. "Good," the judge repeated. "Yes, Your Honor, good, because the current system is broken. It treats women like children who can't be trusted with their own money while simultaneously blaming us for every bad decision the men in our lives make." Clara met his eyes. "If this case helps change that, even a little, then it's worth whatever it costs me." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it finally did, the judge looked at Clara with something that might have been respect. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Whitmore." "I've been called worse, Your Honor." He almost smiled. Then he said, "I will issue my ruling in 1 week. Court is adjourned." Bob. Clara walked out of the courthouse into a wall of noise. Reporters shouting questions, society ladies whispering behind their fans, someone calling her a hero, someone else calling her a disgrace. Adrian materialized beside her, his presence cutting through the chaos. "Carriage! Now!" They made it halfway to the street when someone grabbed Clara's arm. Richard. "You just made a fool of yourself," he hissed. "Let go of her," Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. "This is between me and Clara." Adrian's hand shot out, gripped Richard's wrist hard enough to make him gasp. "I said, let go!" Richard released her, stumbling back. His face was red with fury and humiliation. "You think you've won?" He spat. "You think marrying him changes anything? You're still ruined, still worthless, and nothing you do will ever—" Adrian hit him, not in the face this time, in the stomach, a sharp jab that doubled Richard over and sent him to his knees, gasping. The crowd erupted. Women screamed. Men shouted. Someone ran for the police. Adrian grabbed Clara's hand. "Run!" They ran. Through the streets, around corners, Adrian pulling her along until they lost the crowd in a maze of alleys near the Thames. Clara's lungs burned, her dress was torn, and she was laughing, actually laughing, wild and breathless and alive. "You just assaulted him again," she gasped. "I know." "In front of witnesses." "I know." "They'll arrest you." "Probably." Adrian leaned against a wall, breathing hard. "Worth it." Clara looked at him, this violent, damaged, utterly honest man who'd just ruined himself defending her, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because he deserved it." "That's not a reason." "Because I'm tired of watching people hurt you and getting away with it." His eyes were fierce. "Because you stood in that courtroom and told the truth, and he tried to make you small again. And I won't let him. I won't let any of them." Clara's breath caught. "Adrian!" Footsteps, heavy boots, police whistles. "Run or talk?" Adrian asked. Clara grabbed his hand. "Run." They ran until they found a carriage, paid the driver double to get them back to Thornfield House, and collapsed in the foyer like soldiers returning from battle. Mrs. Donnelly found them there, disheveled and breathless and grinning like idiots. "What happened?" she demanded. "We just made everything worse," Clara said. "Much worse," Adrian agreed. "And tomorrow, we're getting married." Mrs. Donnelly looked between them, shook her head and said, "I'll prepare the brandy." The wedding was small, quiet, nothing like the grand ceremony Clara had planned with Richard. It was perfect. They married in the chapel at Thornfield House just after dawn. Mrs. Donnelly was there, and Adrian's steward, and the vicar who looked mildly terrified the whole time. No flowers, no music, no guests. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Adrian wore his military uniform. When the vicar asked if anyone objected, they both half expected Richard to burst through the doors. He didn't. "I now pronounce you man and wife." Adrian kissed her, brief and formal, a seal on a contract more than anything romantic. But when he pulled back, he whispered, "No regrets?" "Ask me in a year." He smiled, actually smiled, warm and real. They signed the papers. The vicar blessed them nervously. Mrs. Donnelly cried. And just like that, Clara Whitmore became Clara Hale, Duchess of Thornfield. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago, she'd been abandoned at the altar. Now she was married to one of the most powerful men in England. But the victory felt hollow. Because that afternoon, a messenger arrived from the police. Adrian was being charged with assault. 2 counts, both witnessed by dozens of people. If convicted, he'd face prison, and the trial was set for 2 weeks. Clara read the summons, her hands shaking, and realized what Richard had done. He'd won. By making Adrian defend her, by provoking him into violence, Richard had found a way to destroy them both. Adrian would go to prison. Clara would be left alone again. A duchess, in name only, married to a criminal, her reputation even worse than before. "We can fight this," Mr. Brennan said when they summoned him. "Self-defense, provocation. It won't matter," Adrian said flatly. "They have witnesses, they have evidence, and they have a society that wants to see me hang." "Not hang," Brennan corrected. "Prison, maybe a year." "That's not acceptable," Clara said. "Clara, no." She stood, her mind racing. "There has to be something, some way to stop this." "There isn't," Adrian said. "I knew the risks when I hit him, both times. I made my choice." Clara looked at him. Her husband of 6 hours, this man who'd risked everything to stand beside her, and felt the full weight of what she'd cost him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. This is my fault." "This is Richard's fault." Adrian's voice was steel. "And society's fault for protecting men like him. But it's not yours." A knock at the door. The butler entered, looking shaken. "Your Grace, there are men outside. They say they're from the newspapers. They want a statement about the charges." Clara walked to the window. The street was full of them. Reporters, onlookers, society vultures waiting to pick the bones of this scandal. She thought about running, about hiding, about giving up and letting them win. Then she thought about the children at St. Mary's, about Mrs. Hartley's tired eyes, about every person she'd seen crushed by this system and told it was their own fault. She turned to Adrian. "What if we don't fight the charges?" "Clara, what if we use them?" Her mind was racing now, pieces clicking into place. "Richard wants to destroy us. Society wants to see us punished. So let's give them exactly what they expect, and then show them why they're wrong." "I'm not following." Clara smiled, sharp and dangerous and absolutely certain. "Trust me," she said. "I have a plan." And for the first time since this nightmare started, she knew exactly what she had to do. The plan was simple in theory and potentially catastrophic in execution. Clara laid it out in Adrian's study while Mr. Brennan listened with growing horror and Mrs. Donnelly poured increasingly large measures of brandy. "You want to plead guilty?" Brennan said. "Your Grace, that's the only move they won't expect," Clara finished. "Richard wants a trial. He wants weeks of testimony, witnesses, public spectacle. He wants to drag us through the mud until there's nothing left." "So we don't give him one," Adrian said slowly, understanding dawning. "Exactly. You plead guilty. The judge sentences you. You serve whatever time he gives you. Clara, he could get a year in prison, or he could get a fine. Community service, a reprimand." Clara leaned forward. "The point is, we control the narrative. We admit fault, show remorse, and move on before Richard can turn this into his personal revenge tour." Brennan shook his head. "It's too risky. Once His Grace pleads guilty, there's no taking it back." "I know." "And what about your petition, the court case for your dowry? If the Duke is convicted of assault, it undermines everything you argued about judgment and respectability." Clara had thought of that, had spent the last 3 hours thinking of nothing else. "Then we make it part of the argument," she said. "We show that yes, Adrian made a mistake, but he made it defending someone who was being assaulted. We show that even good people can break under pressure, that the system that drove us to this point is the real problem." "That's not a legal defense," Brennan said. "No, it's a social one." Clara met his eyes. "We're not trying to win in court. We're trying to win in the papers, in the drawing rooms, in the places where reputations are actually made and broken." Adrian was watching her with something that looked like admiration. "You've been planning this since the courthouse." I've been planning this since Richard grabbed my arm and you hit him the first time. Clara smiled grimly. I knew he'd use it against us eventually, so I started thinking about how to use it against him instead. Mrs. Donnelly drained her brandy. This is either brilliant or insane. Can it be both? Clara asked. The housekeeper actually laughed. Brennan remained unconvinced. Your Grace, I strongly advise— Do it, Adrian said. File the plea. Tomorrow, if possible. Sir, Clara's right. We're not going to beat Richard at his own game, so we change the game entirely. He stood, moved to the window where reporters still clustered like vultures. How long until the trial if we plead guilty? A week, maybe less. The judge will want to move quickly on a guilty plea. Good. That gives us time. Time for what? Brennan asked warily. Clara and Adrian exchanged a look. To go to war, Clara said. The first shot was fired the next morning. Clara had spent the night drafting a letter, not to the papers, not to society, but to every woman in London who'd ever been told she deserved the abuse she suffered. It was published in 3 newspapers simultaneously. An open letter from the Duchess of Thornfield. To the women of London. Yesterday, my husband was charged with assault for defending me from a man who grabbed me against my will. This man, my former fiancé, had already abandoned me at the altar and spread lies about my character. But when he put his hands on me in anger, society decided the real crime was that my husband stopped him. I write this not to excuse violence. Violence is never the answer. But I write to ask, why are we more horrified by a man defending his wife than by a man assaulting her in the first place? Why is it acceptable for Richard Pemberton to humiliate me publicly, to grab me in the street, to treat me as property he can reclaim at will, but unacceptable for someone to tell him no? I have been called ruined, reckless, improper, insane. I have been blamed for my own abandonment, for my own assault, for every consequence of other people's actions. And I know I am not alone. How many of you have been told that abuse is your fault, that you provoked it, deserved it, should have prevented it? How many of you have been punished for the crimes committed against you? My husband will plead guilty to assault because he did, in fact, strike Mr. Pemberton, twice. And he will accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate. But I will not accept the narrative that his defense of me was the real crime. The real crime is a society that protects men like Richard Pemberton while destroying women like me. The real crime is a system that gives men control over women's bodies, money, and futures, and then blames us when we dare to want something different. I am done apologizing for surviving. I am done being quiet. And if that makes me ruined, then I hope more women have the courage to ruin themselves. Yours in defiance, Clara Hale, Duchess of Thornfield. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Half of London called her a radical, a disgrace, a danger to proper society. The other half started asking questions they'd never asked before. Women began writing to the newspapers, sharing their own stories, admitting that they too had been grabbed, pushed, controlled by men who never faced consequences. The conversation shifted. It wasn't about Clara anymore. It was about every woman who'd ever been told to stay silent. Richard tried to respond with his own letter, painting himself as the victim of a violent madman and an ungrateful woman. But it rang hollow against the tide of female voices suddenly refusing to be quiet. And then Lady Ashford's daughter published her story. Margaret Ashford had been 17 when a family friend assaulted her at a house party. She'd told her mother. Lady Ashford had told her to forget it, that making a scene would ruin her prospects. Margaret had stayed silent for 8 years. Now she was done. Her letter detailed everything: the assault, the silence, the years of watching her attacker welcomed into her family's home while she was told to smile and be grateful he hadn't done worse. The scandal was enormous. Lady Ashford tried to deny it, called her daughter hysterical, overwrought, confused. Margaret produced letters, witnesses, a doctor's report from the night it happened that Lady Ashford had buried. The house of cards started collapsing. Other women came forward, daughters of earls, wives of MPS, women who'd been taught that their suffering was the price of respectability. Clara watched it happen from Thornfield House, equal parts horrified and vindicated. I didn't mean for this, she told Adrian one evening. They were in his study reading the latest round of letters flooding the newspapers. Didn't you? He glanced up from a particularly damning account from a baroness who'd been beaten by her husband for years. You lit the match, Clara. You just didn't expect the whole city to be kindling. People are getting hurt. People were already hurt. They're just finally talking about it. Clara set down the paper she'd been reading, rubbed her eyes. She was exhausted. The wedding, the charges, the sudden transformation into the face of a movement she hadn't asked to lead. What if I'm wrong? She asked quietly. About what? All of it. What if this makes things worse? What if we're just giving them more ammunition? Adrian stood, came around the desk to where she sat. He crouched down so they were eye level, his scarred face serious. You know what I learned in the war? He said. There's no such thing as a safe choice. You can hide in the trenches and die from shelling. You can charge and die from bullets. Or you can try something new and maybe, just maybe, survive. He touched her hand briefly. You're trying something new. That's terrifying, but it's the only way anything ever changes. Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Donnelly burst in without knocking. The judge's ruling, it just came. Clara's heart stopped. The petition. Her dowry. With everything happening, she'd almost forgotten. Mrs. Donnelly handed her the envelope with shaking hands. Clara opened it, scanned the contents, read them again because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Well? Adrian asked. He granted it. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. He granted the entire petition. What? The judge says... She had to stop, swallow hard. He says that my commitment to charitable work demonstrates sound judgment and moral character, that my handling of extraordinary circumstances shows maturity and capability, and that to deny me access to my own funds would be to perpetuate a system of inequality that has no place in modern society. Adrian's eyebrows rose. He actually said that? Word for word, Clara started laughing, slightly hysterical. He called the current system inequality. A judge, in the Court of Chancery. Mrs. Donnelly let out a whoop and actually hugged Clara, propriety be damned. We won, she said. Miss Clara, we actually won. Clara wanted to celebrate, wanted to scream with joy, drink champagne, dance around the study like a madwoman, but all she could think was, now comes the hard part. The money came through 3 days later. £50,000 transferred into an account in Clara's name. Her name. Not her husband's, not her father's, not anyone's but hers. She stared at the bank statement for a full minute, trying to process what it meant. Freedom. The word felt too small for what she was holding. She went to St. Mary's that afternoon with Mr. Brennan and a contract to purchase the building. Mrs. Hartley cried when Clara explained what was happening. You're buying it? She kept saying. The whole building? The whole building, and hiring you as the permanent director. Clara handed her a second document. With a salary that's actually livable. Mrs. Hartley's hand shook as she read. This is too much. It's what you deserve, what these children deserve. Clara looked around at the cramped, freezing room where 30 children were trying to learn their letters. This is just the beginning. They signed the papers that day. By the end of the week, Clara had hired a construction crew to make repairs, a teacher, a nurse, and a cook. She'd ordered beds, blankets, books, proper winter clothes. The newspapers covered every penny spent. Some praised her, called her a philanthropist, a reformer, a woman of remarkable character. Others called her a fool, said she was throwing money away on the undeserving poor, that orphans should be grateful for scraps, not beds and education. Clara ignored them all. She was too busy actually doing the work. But while she was transforming St. Mary's, Adrian's trial date was approaching like a storm on the horizon. The plea hearing was set for Friday, 5 days away. Richard had gone silent after Clara's letter, but his lawyers were still pushing for the maximum sentence. They argued that Adrian was dangerous, that his military service had made him unstable, that he needed to be removed from society for the public good. It was absurd. It was also possibly effective. The judge could give you 6 months, Brennan warned. Maybe more. I know, Adrian said. You could still fight this. No. Adrian's voice was final. We plead guilty. We accept the consequences. That's the whole point. Clara watched him prepare for prison like he was packing for a trip. Practical, efficient, emotionless. It made her want to scream. "You don't have to be so calm about this," she said one night. "What's the alternative? Panic?" "Maybe. Yes. I don't know." She was pacing his study, restless and furious. "You're going to prison because of me. I'm going to prison because I hit a man. Twice. That was my choice. To defend me. Yes. And I'd do it again." He caught her hand, stopped her pacing. "Clara, listen to me. I knew what I was doing, both times. I knew Richard would use it. I knew society would crucify me. And I did it anyway because some things matter more than consequences." "Like what?" "Like you." The words hung in the air between them. This was supposed to be a business arrangement, a practical marriage born of necessity and mutual benefit, no pretense of affection. But somewhere between the courthouse and the assault charges and the late nights planning revolution, something had shifted. Clara pulled her hand back, suddenly afraid of what she was feeling. "We should prepare for tomorrow." "Clara, the hearing's at 10. We should arrive early." Adrian let her retreat, let her hide behind logistics and planning because that's what they both did best. But later that night, lying alone in the Duchess's chambers she still couldn't think of as hers, Clara admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. She cared about him, actually cared. Not the performance of caring, not the idea of it, but the real, messy, terrifying thing. And she had no idea what to do about it. The plea hearing was packed, every seat in the gallery filled, reporters crammed against the walls, society holding its collective breath to see how this particular scandal would end. Clara sat in the front row, back straight, hands folded, the picture of a loyal wife. She dressed carefully, not too fine, not too plain, nothing that would distract from what needed to happen. Adrian stood before the judge in his military uniform, medals gleaming. The prosecutor read the charges, 2 counts of assault, multiple witnesses, clear evidence. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. "Guilty, Your Honor." The gallery erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, given the defendant's clear propensity for violence, the Crown recommends a sentence of 1 year imprisonment." "That's excessive," Brennan interrupted. "His Grace has no prior criminal record. He is a decorated war hero who served with distinction, who brought that violence home with him," the prosecutor shot back. "The court must send a message that assault will not be tolerated, regardless of rank or military service." The arguments went back and forth. Clara listened to them debate Adrian's life like it was a point of law instead of a person. Finally, the judge held up a hand for silence. "I have reviewed this case thoroughly," he said. "I have read the witness statements, examined the evidence, and considered the arguments presented. I have also read the numerous letters submitted to this court regarding the circumstances surrounding these incidents." Clara's pulse quickened. The letters. She'd organized them. Hundreds of women writing to the judge about their own experiences with assault, about the double standard, about why context mattered. "It is clear that the defendant committed assault," the judge continued. "He has admitted as much. However, it is also clear that his actions occurred in defense of his wife, who was being physically restrained against her will by the victim." Richard, sitting in the gallery, went red. "This does not excuse violence," the judge said firmly. "But it does provide context, and that context matters." He paused, looked directly at Adrian. "Your Grace, you have served your country with honor. You have shown remorse for your actions, and you have a wife who clearly believes in your character." He glanced at Clara. "However, the law is clear. Assault is a crime, and crimes must be punished." Clara held her breath. "I hereby sentence you to 6 months' imprisonment." The gallery gasped. "Suspended, contingent upon you completing 200 hours of community service and maintaining good behavior for a period of 2 years. Clara's mind went blank. Suspended. No prison. Adrian's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders drop slightly. Relief. The prosecutor was on his feet. "Your Honor, that is far too lenient. The sentence is final." The judge's voice was steel. "Court is adjourned." The gallery erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors. Society ladies fanned themselves in shock. Clara couldn't move. Adrian turned, found her in the crowd, and something passed between them that was too big for words. Then Richard was there, shoving through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "This is a farce. You assaulted me, and I'm being punished for it," Adrian said calmly, "just not the way you wanted." "You think you've won?" Richard's voice was loud enough that everyone could hear. "You think this changes anything? She's still ruined. You're still a criminal. And You're still a man who abandoned his fiancée at the altar and then assaulted her in the street," Clara cut in. She stood, faced him directly. "And now everyone knows it." "That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. And unlike you, I have witnesses who aren't lying." Richard lunged for her. Adrian moved faster, caught Richard's wrist before he could touch Clara, twisted it just enough to make him gasp. "That's strike 3, Adrian said quietly. "Next time, I won't stop at a broken nose." He released Richard, who stumbled back into the crowd. The reporters were writing furiously. The society ladies were gasping. And Clara was watching Richard's face as he realized that he'd just proved everything they'd been saying about him. He'd assaulted her, in public, in front of witnesses. Again. "You're insane," he spat. "Both of you." "No," Clara said. "We're just done letting you control the narrative." She took Adrian's arm and they walked out of the courthouse together while London burned with gossip behind them. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Richard tried to press new charges for the courthouse incident, but no magistrate would touch it. The public sentiment had shifted too far. Women's letters were flooding the newspapers, each one more damning than the last. Then Arabella Quinton called off the engagement. The announcement was brief and cold. Due to unforeseen circumstances and incompatible values, Miss Quinton and Mr. Pemberton have mutually agreed to end their engagement. Translation: she'd finally seen who he really was and wanted nothing to do with it. Richard's reputation was in ruins. The eligible bachelor had become the man who abandoned one fiancée and couldn't keep another. The charming gentleman had become the thug who assaulted women in public. Clara should have felt vindicated. She mostly just felt tired. She threw herself into the orphanage work. The building renovations were completed. The new beds arrived. The teacher started classes for the first time in the home's history. Clara visited every Tuesday and Friday without fail. She learned every child's name, started teaching reading to the ones who wanted to learn, watched them transform from hollow-eyed waifs into actual children with hope. It was the first thing she'd done since the wedding that felt real. Adrian completed his community service at a hospital for veterans, which was possibly the judge's idea of irony. He spent his hours helping soldiers readjust to civilian life, listening to their stories, offering the kind of understanding only someone who'd been there could give. They were building something. Separately, together, it was hard to tell which. One evening, Clara returned from St. Mary's to find Adrian in the library reading her letter to the women of London, the one that had started everything. "Do you regret it?" he asked without looking up. "Which part?" "Any of it. The letter, the trial, marrying me." Clara sat down across from him, considered the question honestly. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it had to happen, that the system is broken enough that this was necessary, but I don't regret fighting back." "Good." He set down the paper. "Because I got a letter today, from a women's reform society. They want you to speak at their next meeting." "About what?" "About everything. The orphanage, the trial, the petition. They're calling you a symbol." Clara laughed, bitter. "I'm not a symbol. I'm just someone who got angry enough to stop being quiet." "That's what makes you a symbol." She looked at him, really looked. The scars on his face had faded slightly, or maybe she'd just gotten used to them. His eyes were still guarded, still careful, but there was something softer there now, something that hadn't been there when they'd first met. "Adrian?" she said quietly. "Yes?" "Thank you. For all of it. For standing beside me when no one else would." You would have survived without me. Maybe. But it would have been lonelier." He smiled, a real one, rare and genuine. "Same." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Adrian said, "The Women's Society. You should do it. Speak, I mean." "I'm not a public speaker." You stood in a courtroom and made a judge rethink centuries of legal precedent. You're a better speaker than you think. Clara thought about standing in front of a room full of women who'd been told to be quiet and telling them it was okay to scream. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." The speaking engagement was scheduled for the following month at Exeter Hall, one of the largest venues in London. Clara spent weeks preparing, writing, and rewriting her speech until the words felt true. She wasn't trying to be inspiring or political or revolutionary. She was just trying to tell the truth. The night of the event, she was terrified. Mrs. Donnelly helped her dress, something simple and strong, not too fine, and Adrian walked her to the carriage. "You'll be brilliant," he said. "You don't know that." "I do, because you're you." Clara kissed him then, quick and impulsive and completely unplanned. He froze for a second, then kissed her back, and it was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was real. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "What was that for?" Adrian asked. "Courage," Clara said. "Did it work?" "Ask me later." The hall was packed. Every seat filled, women standing in the aisles, more waiting outside. Clara had expected maybe 100 people. There were at least 1,000. She walked onto the stage, and the applause was deafening. Clara stood at the podium, looked out at all those faces, young and old, rich and poor, all of them waiting to hear what she had to say, and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She opened her mouth to speak, and the doors at the back of the hall burst open. Richard Pemberton walked in, flanked by 2 constables and a magistrate. "Clara Whitmore," the magistrate called, "you are under arrest for fraud and theft." The hall erupted in chaos. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Fraud? Theft? What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Your petition to the Court of Chancery was based on falsified documents," Richard said, stepping forward with a smile that was pure venom. "The business plan, the letters of support, the financial projections, all fake. You defrauded the court to steal your family's money." "That's insane." "We have evidence," the magistrate said. "Someone came forward, a witness who helped you fabricate the documents." Clara's mind was racing. The business plan was real. The letters were real. Everything was... And then she understood. Someone had been paid to lie, to say they'd helped her forge evidence. It didn't matter if it was true. It just had to be believable enough to arrest her. Richard had found a new way to destroy her. The constables were moving toward the stage. Clara looked out at the audience, at all those women who'd come to hear her speak, who'd believed in her, and saw their faces shifting from shock to doubt. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe she was a fraud. Then Adrian was there, stepping between her and the constables. "You'll have to go through me first," he said quietly. "Your Grace, please step aside." "No." The hall went silent. Adrian turned to face the crowd, raised his voice so everyone could hear. "My wife is not a fraud. She is not a thief. She is a woman who dared to challenge an unjust system, and now that system is trying to silence her. The law says, the law is wrong." Adrian's voice was steel. "And if you arrest her for fighting back, then you arrest me too, because everything she did with my full knowledge and support." Clara stared at him. He was offering to go down with her, to sacrifice everything they'd built. The magistrate hesitated, clearly not expecting this. Then a voice from the crowd. "Arrest me too." Everyone turned. Margaret Ashford stood, trembling but defiant. "I helped Clara. I wrote letters of support. If that's fraud, then I'm guilty too." Another voice. "And me. And me." One by one, women stood. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All claiming to have helped Clara, all daring the law to arrest them too. The constables looked at the magistrate. The magistrate looked at Richard. Richard's face was white with fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Clara found her voice. "You want to arrest me? Fine. But you'll have to arrest every woman in this room who refused to stay silent. Every woman who told her story. Every woman who dared to believe things could change." She stepped forward, looked Richard dead in the eye. "And when you're done with that, you can explain to Parliament why you're locking up half of London for demanding basic human dignity." The silence was absolute. Then the magistrate said quietly, "Perhaps we should review the evidence more thoroughly before proceeding." "Review?" Richard's voice cracked. You have a witness who may or may not be credible, given the circumstances. The magistrate glanced at the sea of standing women, clearly calculating the political nightmare this would become. We'll investigate further and issue a summons if warranted. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't an arrest either. The constables left, the magistrate left. Richard stayed, staring at Clara with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "It is. You just haven't realized it yet." He left. The hall erupted in applause so loud it shook the rafters. Clara stood on that stage, Adrian beside her, and realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't fighting this battle by herself. She had an army, and they were done being quiet. Clara gave her speech anyway. She stood at that podium with her hands shaking and her voice raw and told 1,000 women exactly what she'd learned about survival, about refusing to disappear, about building something real from the wreckage of everything you thought your life would be. When she finished, the applause lasted 10 minutes. But later that night, back at Thornfield House, the adrenaline wore off and the reality settled in like frost. "He's going to keep coming," Clara said. She was pacing Adrian's study, unable to sit still. "Richard won't stop until he destroys us completely." "Then we destroy him first," Adrian said. "How?" "He's got lawyers, money, family connections, and we've got the truth." Adrian stood, moved to his desk, pulled out a folder. "I've been doing some digging. Richard's not as clean as he pretends." Clara stopped pacing. "What did you find?" 3 gambling debts totaling £20,000, a mistress he's been supporting in Chelsea for the last 2 years, and some very questionable business dealings with a shipping company that's currently under investigation for smuggling. "How did you—" "I still have contacts from the military, people who know how to find things." He handed her the folder. "Richard Pemberton is broke, desperate, and one scandal away from complete ruin. That's why he went after Arabella's money. That's why he's so obsessed with destroying you, because if you succeed, it proves he made the wrong choice." Clara flipped through the documents, her mind racing. This could end him. Yes. We could leak this to the papers, destroy his reputation the way he tried to destroy mine. We could. She looked up at Adrian, saw something careful in his expression. "But you don't think we should. I think you need to decide what kind of war you want to fight." He came around the desk, sat on the edge so they were eye level. "We can bury Richard, make him a cautionary tale, or we can let him bury himself while we build something he can't touch. That's not justice." "No, it's not." Adrian's voice was quiet. "But sometimes survival isn't about winning. It's about being the last one standing." Clara thought about that, about Richard's face when the women in the hall stood up, about the fear she'd seen there, the realization that he'd lost control of the narrative. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "We focus on the orphanage, on the Women's Reform Society, on building the life you actually want instead of fighting the one Richard keeps trying to drag you back to." He paused. "Let him chase ghosts while you become real." It wasn't the revenge Clara wanted, but maybe it was the one she needed. "All right," she said. "We build." Check. The investigation into the fraud charges went exactly nowhere. The witness Richard had produced, a clerk who claimed he'd helped Clara forge documents, recanted within a week. Turned out he'd been paid £500 to lie, and when Mr. Brennan threatened perjury charges, he crumbled like wet paper. The magistrate quietly dropped the case. Richard tried to salvage it, demanded a formal inquiry, but nobody was listening anymore. His credibility was shot. The gambling debts had leaked somehow. Clara suspected Adrian but didn't ask. And suddenly Richard was the one society whispered about. The fallen gentleman, the desperate fortune hunter, the man who'd lost everything chasing revenge. Clara watched his descent with something that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like exhausted relief. She had other things to focus on. St. Mary's was thriving. The children had proper beds now, warm clothes, 3 meals a day. The older ones were learning trades, carpentry, sewing, bookkeeping. The younger ones were learning to read. Clara had hired 2 more teachers and a chaplain who actually cared about the children instead of just lecturing them about moral failure. She'd started a small library, a garden where the children could grow vegetables. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was real and growing, and hers. The Women's Reform Society wanted her to open a second location, then a third. Clara was drafting plans, finding buildings, interviewing staff. She was building an empire out of compassion, and it terrified her. "What if I can't sustain this?" she asked Adrian one evening. They were in his study, their study now, she was learning to think of it, reviewing budgets for the expansion. "Then you scale back. That's not an option. There are children sleeping on the streets, and you can't save all of them." Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. "Clara, you're doing more than anyone else in this city, but you're one person. You have limits." "I don't want limits." "I know, but ignoring them won't make them disappear. It'll just break you." Clara set down the budget reports, rubbed her eyes. She was tired, bone deep, soul tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting for months without rest. "How did you do it?" she asked. "In the war. How did you keep going when everything was terrible and there was no end in sight?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I found something worth surviving for," he said finally. "Not winning, not glory, just someone to write letters to, a reason to come home." He looked at her. "You're building that reason now, for those children, for yourself." "What about you?" Clara asked. "What are you surviving for?" "You." The word hung in the air between them. This marriage was supposed to be practical. A business arrangement, no pretense of affection, but somewhere between the courthouse and the arrests and the late nights planning revolution, they'd stopped pretending. Clara stood, crossed the space between them, kissed him properly for the first time since that impulsive moment before her speech. Adrian kissed her back, one hand cupping her face, and it was nothing like their wedding kiss or the desperate grab for courage. This was deliberate, real. When they pulled apart, Clara said, "This wasn't part of the deal." "No," Adrian agreed. "It wasn't." "Are you complaining?" "Absolutely not." They smiled at each other, and for the first time in months, Clara felt something that wasn't anger or fear or determination. She felt happy. Richard's final move came 3 weeks later. Clara was at St. Mary's, watching the children rehearse a small play they'd written themselves, when Mrs. Donnelly appeared with a telegram. "Your father gravely ill. Requests your presence. Come immediately." Clara stared at the words, feeling nothing. "It could be a trap," Mrs. Donnelly said quietly. "I know." "You don't have to go." "I know that too." But she went anyway. The Whitmore estate looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier, like someone had drained all the life out of it and left just the skeleton behind. Her mother met her at the door, hollow-eyed and brittle. "He's upstairs. The doctors say it could be days or hours." "What does he want?" "To see you." "That's all he'll say." Clara climbed the stairs to her father's bedroom, each step feeling like walking backward through time. The hallway was the same. The portraits on the wall were the same. Everything frozen except her. Her father was in bed, propped up on pillows, looking 20 years older than the last time she'd seen him. His skin was gray, his breathing labored. He opened his eyes when she entered. "Clara." "Father." They stared at each other across the gulf of everything unsaid. "I'm dying," he said finally. "I heard. I wanted to—" He stopped, coughed, tried again. "I wanted to tell you that you were right." Clara's carefully constructed armor cracked slightly. "About what?" "Everything, the petition, the orphanage, standing up instead of disappearing." He looked at her with eyes that were finally, painfully honest. "I was wrong to disown you, wrong to choose reputation over my own daughter, wrong about everything that mattered." Clara wanted to feel vindicated, wanted this apology to fix something. It didn't. "Why now?" she asked. "Why wait until you're dying to say this?" "Because I'm a coward." His voice was barely a whisper. "I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of losing control, afraid that if I admitted you were right, it would mean everything I'd built my life on was a lie." "And was it?" "Yes." The word was so quiet Clara almost didn't hear it. "I wasted my life caring about the wrong things," her father continued, "caring what people thought instead of what was true, following rules that only existed to protect men like me." He reached out a trembling hand. "You're braver than I ever was." Clara looked at that hand the hand that had taught her to ride, that had signed her disownment papers, that was now asking for forgiveness it didn't deserve. She didn't take it. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because you've earned it, but because I'm tired of carrying anger for people who aren't worth it." Her father's hand dropped. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "The estate," he said. "It's yours. I changed my will. Everything goes to you." "I don't want it." He blinked, surprised. "Keep it. Leave it to charity. I don't care." Clara stood. "I don't need your money, or your property, or your approval. I needed a father who would stand by me when everything fell apart. You weren't that person, so now we're strangers who happen to share blood, and that's all we'll ever be." Clara sat. "Goodbye, Father." She walked out and didn't look back. Her mother was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "Did you make peace with him?" "No," Clara said. "But I made peace with myself. That's more important." She left the estate and didn't return. Not when her father died 3 days later, not for the funeral, not when her mother wrote begging her to come back and help settle the inheritance. Clara was done with that life. She had a different one to build. The second orphanage opened in August, in Whitechapel. The third opened in September near the docks. By winter, Clara was running a network of 5 homes housing over 200 children. She'd hired a staff of 30, established apprenticeship programs with local tradesmen, and started a small school that was actually teaching useful skills instead of just moral lectures. The newspapers called her the Orphan Duchess, the Reform Lady, the woman who changed London. Clara called herself tired. She was in her office at Thornfield House. Adrian had given her an entire wing for the charity work, when Margaret Ashford arrived with news. "Richard's left the country," Margaret said, dropping into a chair with the kind of casual familiarity that came from working together for months. "Sailed for America last week. Creditors were closing in." Clara looked up from the budget she'd been reviewing. "Did he pay his debts?" "Not a penny, just ran." "Good riddance," Margaret smiled. "Margaret Klutz, I thought you'd be more triumphant." "I'm too exhausted for triumph." Clara set down her pen. "Besides, him leaving isn't a victory. It's just the end of that particular chapter. And the beginning of a new one." Margaret pulled out a newspaper, slid it across the desk. "Have you seen this?" It was a parliamentary report, a proposal for new legislation regarding women's property rights, citing Clara's case as precedent. "They're actually listening," Margaret said. "Not all of them, not yet, but some. And that's more than we had 6 months ago." Clara read the proposal, feeling something tight in her chest loosen. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was movement. "We need to push harder," she said. Margaret laughed. "You never stop, do you?" "Can't afford to." But later that night, alone with Adrian, Clara finally let herself stop. They were in the library, the fire burning low, both of them reading in comfortable silence. It was domestic and ordinary and everything Clara had thought she'd never have. "Are you happy?" Adrian asked suddenly. Clara looked up from her book. "Why do you ask?" "Because you're always moving, always planning the next thing. I can't tell if you're running towards something or away from something." She thought about that, about the orphanages and the reform work and the constant, relentless push to do more, be more, fix more. "Both," she said honestly. "I'm running away from the person I used to be, the one who thought being good meant being quiet. And I'm running toward, I don't know, something better." "Have you found it?" "Some of it. Yes." She set down her book, moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "I found that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive things that should have destroyed me, that there are people worth fighting for." "Like?" "The children at St. Mary's, Mrs. Hartley, Margaret." She paused. "You." Adrian set down his own book, turned to face her fully. "This wasn't supposed to be a real marriage." "I know. We were supposed to be business partners. Allies. Nothing more." "I know that too. So what are we now?" Clara took his scarred hand, laced her fingers through his. "I think we're people who survived the worst and decided to build something good from the wreckage. I think we're partners who became friends, who became something I don't have a word for yet." Love? Adrian suggested quietly. The word should have scared her, should have sent her running back to the safety of emotional distance and practical arrangements. It didn't. Maybe, Clara said. Is that terrifying? Absolutely. Good. I'd hate to be the only one. Adrian laughed, a real one, warm and unguarded, and pulled her close. They sat there as the fire died down, not talking, just being together in a way that felt earned instead of expected. Eventually, Clara said, "Do you ever regret it? The marriage. Everything that came after." "Every day," Adrian said. Clara pulled back, startled. He smiled. "I regret that it had to happen the way it did, that you had to be destroyed before you could be free, that I had to come back from war broken before I could understand what strength actually means." He touched her face gently. "But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. And I don't regret fighting for something that matters instead of just surviving." "We're quite a pair," Clara said. "The jilted bride and the violent duke. The reformer and the war hero. The two most stubborn people in London." They smiled at each other, and Clara thought, This is what I was running toward. A year after the wedding that wasn't, Clara stood in the newly renovated St. Mary's and watched 50 children perform a concert for an audience of donors, politicians, and society members who'd finally decided that maybe, possibly, the orphan duchess had a point. The children sang beautifully. Perfectly? No. But with heart and joy and the kind of unselfconscious enthusiasm that came from actually being cared for. Clara watched from the back, Adrian beside her, and felt something she'd thought was impossible. Pride. Not the brittle, defensive pride that had carried her through the worst, but real satisfaction. The knowledge that she'd taken her pain and turned it into something that helped people who couldn't help themselves. After the concert, a young girl approached her, one of the first children Clara had met at the old St. Mary's, back when everything was freezing and hopeless. "Your Grace," the girl said, shy but determined, "I wanted to thank you." "For what, Anne?" "For seeing us. For making them see us." Anne gestured at the crowd of wealthy donors. "Nobody looked at us before. We were just invisible. But you made us real." Clara's throat tightened. "You were always real, sweetheart. I just helped people notice." Anne smiled and ran off to join her friends. Adrian came up beside Clara, handed her a glass of wine. "You all right?" "Better than all right." Clara watched the children laughing and playing, safe and fed and hopeful. "I think I might actually be happy." "Might be? Fine. I am happy." She looked at him. "Are you?" Surprisingly, yes. Adrian's expression was soft, unguarded in a way it never would have been a year ago. "Turns out marriage to a revolutionary is more interesting than I expected. I'm not a revolutionary. You changed the law, Clara. You changed how this city treats women and children and anyone who doesn't fit their perfect little boxes." He raised his glass. "If that's not revolution, I don't know what is." They toasted to that, to small revolutions and hard-won happiness, and the kind of partnership that came from choosing each other every day instead of just once. The party wound down. Donors left with pledges and promises. Politicians made speeches about reform that might actually mean something. The children were herded off to bed by staff who actually cared about them. Clara and Adrian walked back to Thornfield House through streets that felt less hostile than they had a year ago, or maybe Clara was just less afraid. "What's next?" Adrian asked. "Next? You've changed trust law, opened 5 orphanages, started a women's reform movement. What's your next impossible goal?" Clara thought about that, about all the things that still needed fixing. The women who still couldn't access their own money, the children still sleeping on streets, the systems that still crushed people for being poor or female or simply unlucky. "Everything," she said. Adrian laughed. "Of course." "Is that a problem?" "Not even a little." He took her hand as they walked. "Just promise me you'll occasionally stop long enough to breathe." "I'll try." "That's all I ask." They walked in comfortable silence, two people who'd been broken by the same world and decided to break it back. 3 months later, Clara received a letter from Arabella Quinton. It was short, formal, and unexpectedly honest. Dear Clara, I have been following your work with great interest. What you've accomplished with the orphanages is remarkable, and I find myself ashamed that I did not see your strength sooner. I wanted to write and apologize. Not for ending my engagement to Richard, that was the best decision I ever made, but for believing the rumors about you, for thinking that you were ruined instead of recognizing that you were being forged into something stronger. I have recently joined the Women's Reform Society. I hope to contribute in some small way to the changes you have begun. I do not expect forgiveness or friendship. I simply wanted you to know that you were right about everything. Yours in solidarity, Arabella Quinton. Clara read the letter twice, then filed it away with all the other correspondence from women who'd found their courage by watching her find hers. Forgiveness was complicated. Trust was earned slowly. But solidarity? That she could offer. She wrote back that evening, inviting Arabella to the next Reform Society meeting. Baby steps toward a world that didn't pit women against each other, that didn't make them compete for scraps of power and respectability. Small revolutions, one letter at a time. On the anniversary of the wedding that wasn't, the day Richard had left her at the altar, Clara woke early and went to St. Mary's. She didn't tell Adrian where she was going, didn't make a big production of it. She just needed to be there, to remember where she'd started and see how far she'd come. The building was quiet, the children still asleep. Clara walked through rooms that had been freezing and desperate a year ago and were now warm and full of possibility. Mrs. Hartley found her in the library, staring at shelves full of books the children actually wanted to read. Couldn't sleep? The older woman asked. Didn't want to. Clara turned to face her. A year ago today, my life ended. Or I thought it did. And now? Now I think it actually began. Clara smiled. Funny how the worst day of your life can also be the best thing that ever happened to you. Mrs. Hartley nodded. You know what I see when I look at you? What? A woman who fell and decided to build wings on the way down. She squeezed Clara's hand. Those children in there? You gave them wings too. That's no small thing. After Mrs. Hartley left, Clara stood alone in the quiet library and let herself feel everything she'd been too busy to process. The grief for the life she'd lost. The anger at the system that had tried to destroy her. The pride in what she'd built from the ruins. The love she'd found when she'd stopped looking for it. All of it, tangled together, impossible to separate. She was crying when Adrian found her. He didn't say anything, just pulled her close and let her sob into his chest until the storm passed. I thought I was fine, Clara said when she could speak again. You are fine. Then why am I falling apart? Because you finally can. Adrian's voice was gentle. You've been holding it together for a year, Clara. You're allowed to break now. I don't want to break. Too bad. You're human. It comes with the territory. Clara laughed through her tears, pulled back to look at him. How are you so calm about this? I spent 6 months in a war zone. I learned that falling apart is just as important as holding together. You can't do one without the other. They stood there in the early morning light, two broken people who'd figured out how to be whole together. Eventually, Clara said, Thank you. For what? For being here. For not needing me to be perfect. You're welcome. Though for the record, perfect would be boring. Good thing I'm a disaster then. The best kind of disaster. They went home together to Thornfield House that was finally starting to feel like theirs instead of just his. They had breakfast, reviewed the day's schedule, argued about budget allocations for the 6th orphanage Clara wanted to open. Normal, domestic, real, everything Clara had thought she'd never have. 5 years later, Clara stood in Parliament, not in the gallery where women were relegated, but on the floor where laws were made. A special invitation, a chance to speak about the Women's Property Act that was finally being debated. The chamber was packed. MPs who supported reform, MPs who thought she was destroying civilization, and in the gallery above, hundreds of women who'd fought for this moment. Clara wore dark blue, armor and statement. Her hair was pinned severely, her spine straight. She was terrified. Adrian was in the gallery beside Mrs. Donnelly and Margaret Ashford and Arabella Quinton and every other woman who'd stood up when it mattered. The speaker recognized her. The Duchess of Thornfield may address the chamber. Clara took a breath, stepped forward, and told them exactly what she thought of a system that treated half the population like children who couldn't be trusted with their own lives. She didn't pull punches, didn't soften the message, didn't perform respectability. She told the truth. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Then the gallery erupted in applause, women cheering, crying, shouting their support, while the MPs sat frozen, unsure how to respond to this breach of protocol. The bill didn't pass that day, or that month, but it would, eventually. Because Clara and women like her had proven that change was possible, that the system could be challenged, that one person standing up could start a movement. Walking out of Parliament, Clara was swarmed by reporters and supporters, and angry men shouting about the decline of society. Adrian materialized beside her, creating space with nothing but his presence. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I just declared war." "You did, 5 years ago. This is just the latest battle." Clara looked back at Parliament, at the building that held the power to change everything or nothing depending on who was brave enough to fight. "We're going to win," she said. "I know. It might take years. Probably. I might not live to see it. Maybe not. But they will." Adrian gestured to the crowd of young women holding signs and chanting for reform. "You started something that won't stop just because you're tired." Clara watched those young faces, fierce and hopeful and absolutely certain they could change the world. She remembered being that certain once, before reality taught her that change was slow and brutal and cost more than anyone should have to pay, but also that it was possible. That was the gift she'd been given in the wreckage of her old life. Not happiness, though she'd found that too. Not justice. That was still a work in progress. But possibility. The knowledge that the worst thing that ever happened to her had also freed her to become someone who could fight back. "Come on," Adrian said. Let's go. Let's go home." "Home," Claire repeated. The word still felt strange and wonderful. "Yes, let's." They walked through London together, past the newspapers screaming about the controversial Duchess, past the society ladies whispering about scandal, past St. Mary's where 50 children were learning that they mattered. They walked to Thornfield House, where Mrs. Donnelly had dinner waiting and a fire burning and rooms that were finally, truly theirs. And Clara thought about the girl who'd stood at an altar a lifetime ago, waiting for a man who would never come. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd learned that being abandoned was the beginning, not the end. That ruin could be freedom, that the worst anyone could do to you was give you nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose were dangerous. They changed the world. Clara smiled at that thought, took Adrian's hand, and walked into her future with her eyes wide open. The jilted bride had become a duchess. The scandal had become a symbol. And the woman everyone said was ruined had proven that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn down everything that was destroying you and build something better from the ashes. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was real. And it was hers. And it was enough.